Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello everybody, Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, checking in with you on this Wednesday night live version from the Pond Boss Facebook page here, hanging out in the nice, cool breeze of North Texas. Very nice. See some guys checking in already. See Mike Cottrell, Dan Drollop. One of them slipped by me. I know there's somebody else that's already checked in, so glad you guys are here. We got 6 guys on board. Today I think I'm going to talk about how to design and build the perfect small pond. You know, across the nation there's some estimates up to 6.5 million private ponds and lakes. And I bet you 80% of those are less than 3 acres, maybe more than that. So I thought tonight I'd really kind of zero in and talk to you a little bit about how to design the perfect small pond. Actually, in Pond Boss, I've got a column each issue called Managing the Mini Pond. And it's what's really crazy, that may be the hardest one to write, because I've covered so many topics over the last 15 or so years of writing and editing Pond Boss. But I do know that is a big topic that people really, really want to talk about. So, and actually, I got a note earlier in the day. Mike Cottrell, Dan Drollop, Daniel Hendrick, Chuck Brinkman, Brad Rom, Kelly Duffy, Billy Birch. Good to see you guys. Welcome. And I got a note from nickname Boudin, Ron Boudin, from down in South Louisiana, Lake Charles area. And he wanted me to talk about what it takes to design small ponds. So I thought I'd do that. Of course, you guys know the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. Click like and share this to your timeline. You'll be eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss mug. We had a winner this week, Lisa Sig Sauer. Lisa, email us your mailing address, your shipping address, and we'll get that out to you. $35 a year, folks, for this magazine. It's well worth it. You know, my favorite little tagline is, looks like Jennifer Ardoin is on. Her husband, Ron's the guy that came up with the topic I did today. John Funk had a question. I'm going to pitch that out there in a minute. I see Jason Nepstad checking in. When it comes to designing a pond, whether it's big or small, I'm going to focus on small ones. I see Kelly Duffy. Yeah, I already said hi to Kelly. Kelly, we missed you last week, man. There were some things going on that you were being interested in. Marty Scribner liked the video. That's good. Christopher Smith did the hashtag. Got that. Attaboy. Jason did too. Anyway, the topic of small ponds comes up often. I mean, I get anywhere from 5 to 30 calls a week from people with small ponds that want advice or did something that they look back and say, I wish I'd have done it different. Matter of fact, I got a call yesterday from a couple that were building a road and their property not 10 miles from where I live, and they started talking about where the road made a curve. There was a little creek that kind of meandered parallel to the road, and they thought about damming it up, making a pond. So they talked to the road builder, and the guy said, yeah, I can build you a pond there. You bet. Happy to do that. And so he did, and then they started kind of digging around looking for information, and they're not convinced it was built right. So they found us and called the office. I called them back yesterday, and I've got an appointment with them next week to go just see what they have and was it built right. So tonight I want to talk about what right means, because there's several ways to skin this cat. Now, if you want more information, at Pond Boss Magazine, we've got a couple of really good books for you. I see John Wilson checking in from Ohio, Kenneth Primo, Chris Horsley, he knows how to play. But we have two books. If you want to build a pond, whether it's big, small, intermediate, whatever you want to do, we've got this book called Perfect Pond, Want One. And that's a book that I authored, and with a little bit of help from Otto and from Mark McDonald as the editor. And I mean, it's got all kinds of topics. You know, it's full of photographs. It tells you what to do. Actually, this book starts off talking to you about how to buy the land even before you have a pond. So we start off in this book about let's see, here we go. Starting at the start, what to look for when buying property. Planning, the backbone of building a lake, and that is absolutely true. I'm going to do a little excerpt from this other book in a minute. What does it take to build it? What does it take to renovate an existing pond? What do you do about leaky ponds? And then what are your obstacles? So this takes you through that. This book right here, Perfect Pond, I think it's $20. And it's the third book that I've written. I've got another one that's out of print called Basic Pond Management. I have rewritten that book, getting ready to send it to layout. I got to pick out some more photos for it as a rewrite. And then one called Raising Trophy Bass, which I'm getting ready to rewrite that one. We've only got a handful of copies of that one, and that one's sold out. And it's time to rewrite that one. But the go-to book is Mike Otto's book called Just Add Water. Now this one I think is $35 plus a little freight. And this other one's $20. And I guarantee you there's way, way more value in the words in these books that'll help save you money, keep you from making the mistakes that you would. Now Otto's book's pretty cool. There's the cover. I mean, Mike has nailed it. So where I'm going to start off talking about building ponds is in the very back of Mike's book, before the glossary. See if I can find it here. He says, how and where to find help. And he says, how much help do you need? Well, how much do you know? And the answer in the first question helps you figure out what you need to find out to the second one. There's a lot of questions you got to ask. And here's a list of questions that Otto has in his book. There's Mike right there, spending time in front of a computer, which I'm sure he just did that to take this photograph. He doesn't spend any time in front of a computer unless it's 3:30 in the morning before he goes to work. So here's some of the questions that you need to answer. Is there enough watershed drainage to fill the lake? That's job one. So in other words, when you get ready to build a small pond, why are you doing that? What's the purpose? I'll tell you this. 40 years ago when I first started, if somebody wanted to build a pond or lake, they went to the coffee shop at 5 in the morning, because if you waited till 5:20, you're going to miss the guy you need to talk to. And you look for the guy in bib overalls, khaki shirt, tobacco stain in his mouth, drinking a cup of coffee. Because when he finishes that first cup of coffee, second cup of coffee, he's going to go out and start servicing his equipment and get ready to move dirt that day, because he could only move dirt in the daylight back then. And that pond was going to be whatever he told you he would build. Well, it's fast forward now 40 years, and it's not like that now. Every pond has a purpose. Where we live at Lusk Lodge, 2, we got 12 acres, and I have 8 ponds out on there, and every single one of those ponds serves a different purpose. So that's a big deal. So you need to figure out what purpose your pond is going to serve before you start even thinking about moving any dirt or renovating an existing pond. So you got a bunch of questions to ask. Holy cow, there's Clark Cole. Good to see you again, Clark. Nikki Probst, Dick Tabbert. Clay is always nice. He's right. John Mashburn. Yep, you're right. That's right. Got to have clay. So job one when you start planning to build a pond is, do you have the water supply to support a pond for that size? Because if you have too little water, too small of a watershed, or too big of a watershed, you need to know that before you start moving any dirt. So here's some of the questions that Otto has posed that you need to think about. I'm just going to read them to you free, except if you're going to build one, buy his book, because it would be real important to help you, give you some really good tips. Thanks there, Clark. I enjoy doing it. Jim Liner checking in from over there in Alabama. All right, so here's what it says. Is there enough watershed drainage to fill the lake? What kind of soils do you have? Should the lake pond have some kind of a pipe outlet system? If so, how big and what kind? You know, and that's a mathematical calculation. That's an engineering calculation. That's easy to figure out. How much maintenance will your pond need when it's finished and for how long? Ooh, most people don't think about that. How do you maintain a pond? The majority of the maintenance occurs if you don't have the right slopes. You got to have the right slopes. How wide should you build a road over the top of a dam? I was talking to a guy about a month ago, and he said, I told my dirt guy that I wanted to build a 2-lane highway across my dam. I said, why'd you do that? And he said, well, I just want a 2-lane highway. I said, have you asked him to compare the cost of putting a 2-lane highway on top of your dam compared to a 12-foot wide pathway that your pickup can go across? He said, no. I said, it's 2.5 times the volume of dirt just because you're going to have a 4-to-1 slope on the backside of your dam. He said, oh, is it that much? And I said, yeah. And that was, for him, that was the difference between like a $60,000 dam and a $180,000 to $200,000 dam. Just because he said he wanted a wider road, just because he didn't know what he didn't know. What are the best fish to stock in a small pond? Well, it kind of depends on where you are and what your goals are. You got a lot of options nowadays. Are there any fish you can't stock in a 10-acre pond? How much will the water go up and down from season to season? Well, you figure that out based on the amount of evaporation that you've got in your area. Like if we go in Texas, if you draw a line north and south, every 10 miles, the average annual rainfall, whatever that means now, drops or rises 1 inch. So the further west we go, it drops 1 inch. 100 miles gets 10 inches of rain less than we get here. We have 10 inches less average annual rainfall than 100 miles east of us. So you need to know what your average annual rainfall is, and you need to compare that to the size of watershed you've got. So if you're going to be in an area that's got a pretty nice watershed, but your average rainfall is less, and when you have a less average rainfall, odds are high that you have a higher evaporation rate. So we go 100 miles west of here, the average annual rainfall is probably 26 inches of rain per year, but their evaporation is 95 inches a year. So you got to calculate that, compare the watershed size, so when you do get the rains, it fills that pond back up. So that's kind of the way to do that. It says, what kind of a dock do you need and how big should it be? Well, what are you going to do with it? That helps you decide that. What about a boat ramp? You want to be able to launch in your small pond? Do you need to worry about flooding, an underground gas pipeline easement? Woo! Better do a little homework there. What about power lines? Are the power lines going across where you want to build a pond? You're probably going to have to get permission from the power company. How big can you build your lake before you need legal help? Great question. We're permitted to death, and some states are so heavily regulated it's not even worth it. Fortunately where we are, we're not that heavily regulated, but you need to know because there can be local watershed regulations, there can be local aquifer regulations, there can be city, county, state, and federal regulations. Part of your due diligence, whether you're going to build a half-acre pond or a 5-acre lake, is to figure out what permits apply to you. And the best thing to do there is ask a local source. I'd start with an engineer or maybe the NRCS or somebody that knows more about it than you do. What kind of permits are there? Do you need grass on the dam? You always need grass on the dam. Should it be fenced? Only if you want it to not erode, to keep livestock off of it, to keep some predators away. What should you do to keep your lake from filling up with dirt? What can you do with the dirt with the silt when it finally does fill up your pond? What angle should the slopes be? How deep is deep enough? What about livestock and wildlife? Why in the world are you building this lake anyway? These are all questions in Otto's book. $35, I think, plus a little bit of freight. So I'm going to start with that, and there's some really, really good stuff. Let's see here. We got Shannon Kane checking in. Mark Sanders. Hi, Mark. Good to see you, buddy. Joanne Pillafont. Haven't seen Joanne in a while. Steve Lewis from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Jim says the electric fish lake today. That's good stuff. I'd love to see the results. Michael Eric checking in from Iowa. So I'm going to talk some more about that. John Funk sent a question in today. He said, a year ago in May, you had a video on things that affect our ponds like droughts and floods. This year, we in the upper Midwest, remember he's in Michigan, have been wet since last fall. Not flood wet, but the kind that runs water through one's pond continuously. Can you talk about the effects this has on water quality, fishery, and growth? I normally do not have water moving through the pond at this time of year, but it has moved through since last fall. Thanks. Always a great info and great shows. Well, thanks there, John. Here's my answer to that. Fish like to have stability. Now, over the years, I've learned a lot about water. I've got more to learn, but I got a head start on a lot of folks. So one of the big lessons that I learned was Richmond Mill Lake. Richmond Mill Lake is over in North Carolina, not too far from where Jason lives. And hey, Todd Austin, good to see you, buddy. Bev Root from Vilbig. You guys have been getting quite a bit of rain over there on Vilbig. The thing that was a little bit of a puzzle to me about Richmond Mill Lake is the pH of the water is 5.3. It flows anywhere from 6 to 10,000 gallons per minute over the spillway, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's with a pH at 5.3, that's low, but it's not so low the fish won't spawn. But it's real low, so low that it affects the productivity of the lake. So there's not a big organic buildup. There's not a whole lot of siltation. There's not a lot of nutrients. So in essence, that water's pretty sterile. So with that much water flowing through there in a normal lake, we would lime it to get the pH up and get the alkalinity up. Then in that part of the country, we'd fertilize so we can get the plankton bloom built up, so we could create a food chain from the bottom up. Well, we couldn't do that with that lake because it would flush it out and it would cost too much money. With that much water flowing and through a 125-acre lake at that point, that's how big it is, it didn't make sense to do that. So we decided we would manage it as it is. So one of the things I figured out was that water was predictable chemically and biologically every single day. Well, at first you think that's a lemon, but the lemonade is the water's constant. The chemistry is the same, the flow rate's consistent, the pH is consistent. Whereas, like what John's talking about, in his lake, when during a normal span of time where there's not water flowing into it, the quality of that water ebbs and flows with the amount of organic load that it's got in it. So if it's got a bunch of nutrients dissolved in it, nature is putting those nutrients to work. When those nutrients go to work, something's growing. And if something's growing, it's creating a food chain and it's dynamic. So it ebbs and flows. It goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down. And when it gets to those peaks, those high peaks, to explain that to you, what that means is when I talked to, here's a real world deal. Talked to Kenny Backus probably every 30 minutes the last 3 or 4 days. Kenny Backus has got an 18-acre lake in northeast Texas. And for years, he's tried to get a plankton bloom. Well, he finally got one. And he may have overdone it a little bit. The biologists are watching it pretty constantly. But his visibility right now is about 18 to 20 inches. The temperature is right in the upper 70s. But what he is seeing is he's seeing oxygen rising up into double digits late in the afternoon and then dropping down to about 7 early in the morning. So that 7 parts per million in the morning rising to 10 or 11 in the afternoon, that's a spike. So at 10 or 11 parts per million, that water is actually super saturated with oxygen. That can have an impact on fish. That can be a little stressful for fish because it's going up and down. At the same time that plankton bloom is developing as it is, when you have photosynthesis then followed by respiration, which happens at night, then you're going to see carbon dioxide going up and down as well. That affects the pH. So his pH, if he didn't have a well-buffered lake with plenty of lime in it, his pH could drop a point and a half every day. That's stressful for fish. So what's going on up in Michigan, and probably in a lot of places right now because of the amount of rain we've had, that effect goes away. Now it's a trade-off because when you've got quite a bit of water flowing in, depending on how much water is flowing out, that's going to determine how productive that the water is and if it can hold a bloom. So if you've got 10 gallons a minute coming in, 10 gallons a minute going out, and that pond is 1.5 acres, it's not going to affect your plankton bloom. But what it will do is help affect the stability and make that water more stable chemically. So flowing in and flowing out. What you get in, what you're going to spit out. So that gives it something consistent. So that's probably a pretty good thing. So now let's see. We got a few questions, and I'm going to zero back in on that. Let's see. Chad Donaldson. I know we played phone tag. How hot can largemouth bass get? Can they live in a 2-foot deep by 50-foot pond? No, they can't. Largemouth bass start to get really stressed in 83-degree water. Now, that doesn't mean they can't live in it. But when that water hits 85, 86, 87, and they don't have a thermal refuge, they can die from that. That's too hot. Now, what happens in a normal lake, say a pond is 10 feet deep, thermocline is going to form at about 5 feet. In the summertime, and 2 foot of water in North Texas, because I know that's where Chad's place is, that water can get into the upper 90s. And actually, it can go in 92, 93, 94. And if we get 300 or 400 degree days in the afternoon, that water could get 98, 99. It can get hot tub hot, I'm telling you. And then at night, it's going to drop down into the 80s. So it can have a 20 degree swing, maybe not that much, but at least a 10 to 15 degree swing in a day. That's hard on fish. So they really need a thermal refuge. In this case, a pond that's 10 feet deep with a 6-inch thick thermocline, those bass will go down and sit right in the top of that thermocline where there's just enough oxygen they don't suffocate. Just so they can get 5 degrees cooler or 4 degrees cooler. So no, they can't live in a 2 foot deep by 50 foot pond. That won't work well for them. Plus, if you got a 2 foot deep pond, you're going to have predators. You will become new best friends with all the great blue herons, and if they don't catch your bass, they're going to poke enough holes in them that they die. So no, don't do it. Michael Eric from Iowa. I have a 4 or so acre 3-year-old pond that has bluegills, hybrid bluegills, crappie, red ear, largemouth, perch, catfish, and walleye. Have 2 feeders feeding Aquamax MVP. The big problem I have is hybrid green sunfish reproducing like rabbits. Do I stock a couple of northerns this fall, or just keep targeting these problem fish? I release all other species. Once you're, let's see, in Iowa, I would expect my bluegills to spawn at least twice a year, Michael. So I would expect, now that you're feeding MVP, you're likely to get 3 spawns out of the bluegill. So once your largemouth bass are probably 13 to 15 inches long, they'll control those green sunfish. Green sunfish are going to spawn once, and they don't live that long, 5 years, and they're going to get tapped out. So once you're, and when you got, let's see, what do you got here? You got crappie, largemouth bass, perch, yellow perch, catfish, and walleye. You're predator heavy. So I think at some point, once those predator fish, especially the largemouth bass, the channel catfish, and the walleye get to be a couple of pounds a piece, they'll wear those green sunfish out. But if you want to keep culling, sure, go ahead and do it. That's all good. Mark Dyer watching in Nebraska. I'll be in Nebraska next Monday in Lincoln. Let's see here. Yep, Zach Russell. He's over there hanging out, fighting for space with Jason Nipstead. Let's see. Same here. I'm down in North Carolina now, so I'm missing out on the walleye though. Oh well. And Ron, when talking about water temperatures, are you talking about surface temps or subsurface temps? I don't care where it is. If the temperature is 87 degrees, bass are going to die. So that's why it's real important. Like Ron, where you are in South Louisiana, aeration's a big deal for you. And I'll talk more about that briefly in a minute. But where in the South, I think it's important to aerate ponds, but also don't aerate at the deepest point. Leave a couple of feet beneath where you're aerating so that nature can have a chance at developing a thermocline and a cool water refuge. If you can't, then turn the aeration system off during the day when it's hot. Put it on a timer, kick it on from 9 at night till 9 in the morning, then let it go off. That will drop your ambient temperature top to bottom from where the aeration's set up. I'm presuming bottom diffused aeration too, by the way. That will allow that water to be the average of what the nighttime temperatures are. So you'll take away the hot part of the day with that. Tom Davis, raining in Ohio, man. It's been raining here too, man. So now let's go back to designing a perfect small pond. Well, first thing is answer the question, why? Why am I going to build this pond? Am I going to build it to stop erosion? Am I going to build it because I want a nice little fish pond? Do I want the grandkids to have a place to swim? Do I want to irrigate out of it? So you need to ask yourself the answer to the question, why? Why am I building it? And write that down. And then start looking. So that's basically going to tell you what your goals are. Then once you figure out what your goals are, then you can start thinking about designing the pond. Now, designing the pond, actually, you got two jobs. One is you got to be able to impound water. The amount of water, if you're damming up a watershed, you got to be able to impound the incoming water, capture it, and then release excess water in an orderly fashion. Now, in these days and times, seems like we're having more and more 500-year floods, 100-year floods. I mean, they're on the news every day. Look at what happened in Oklahoma and going on in Arkansas right now. There's a live hauler that's near the Mississippi River whose truck got flooded. He couldn't get it out. And the insurance company's telling him that it'll be July before they can even get in there and look at it because the water won't recede until then. You know, so if you know your watershed size, that's going to tell you how big the pond should be based on how much rainfall you get. Now, if you have a water well, totally different deal. Now, here's a number. Write this down, guys. Run and get a crayon and a Big Chief tablet, because here's what you got to know. 1 acre, 1 inch deep is 27,000 gallons of water. 1 acre, 1 inch deep, 27,000 gallons of water. So if you've got an 8-acre watershed and your average annual rainfall is X, whatever it is, you can find that on the National Weather Service. You can look it up in your local USDA office. They know it. And compare that to your evaporation rate. And that's going to tell you about how big a pond you need to build for that size watershed. So if you got a 10-acre watershed and you want to build a 1-acre pond, you know, and your average annual rainfall is 35 inches and it's coming through the forest, then you also can calculate the runoff amount out of that. So if say you got 30 inches of rain and it's coming off of cropland, probably 70% of that's going to be runoff and the rest of it's not. It's going to get picked up before it ever gets to your pond. You know, so then you can calculate the volume of water. Once you've done that, that's going to tell you how big the dam needs to be. Plus, it's also going to tell you, based on the average 100-year flood. A 100-year flood here is not the same as a 100-year flood in Albuquerque, which isn't the same as a 100-year flood in Iowa City, Iowa. You know, a 100-year flood is calculated based on the odds of that amount of rain coming over in a 24-hour period once every 100 years. That's how they figure it. That doesn't mean you're going to get that flood every 100 years. That just means that's the odds of it. Okay, so once you know that, then you know how big the spillway needs to be. Then you can decide if you need an overflow pipe or not. You know, and the overflow pipe could be a management tool. So based on your goals, then that's going to tell you what you can, what you can't do, what you should and what you shouldn't do. Now, once you've answered the question why, that's going to tell you what you need to do inside the pond. So if you're telling me, hey, I want to build a pond that the kids can swim in, and it's 40 yards from the house, you're going to want to have at least 3-to-1 slopes going down, and I would put in a ridge that's about 4 foot deep, so that when they first get in the pond, right there, maybe it's only 10 feet wide, so that you go down 3-to-1 to 4 feet deep, and you have a 10-foot wide ledge, then 3-to-1 all the way to the bottom. That gives them a place where if somebody falls in, they can get out. You know, plan some steps. We put concrete blocks in our pond so people can get out. So if you're gonna plan for fish, why are you doing that? Are you wanting for the grandkids to catch? Well, then you're probably going to have a dock. Where are you going to put the dock? Because the way you design the inside of the pond, where you have a dock, is going to be different than what you might design way in the upstream where the water's going to be coming in, especially if it's a teardrop shaped pond. So there's a lot to think about, but I promise you, the more you think about it and the more you plan for it in the very beginning, the more satisfied you're going to be. I mean, thinking back to the question Mike's got in his book about what kind of maintenance issues you're going to have. Well, your maintenance issues come from water that's too shallow, or slopes that aren't right, or building the wrong size pond in the wrong kind of watershed. Siltation, can you prevent silt from getting into your pond? Well, the slopes are going to help determine that, and vegetate bare soils. Any disturbed soils, especially above the water line, really need to be turfed or ground cover or something like that, so that dirt can't wash into your pond as it's filling up. So once you've figured out your goals, say you want to stock some fish and you want your You want to be able to have the neighborhood kids come and catch a few fish. Well, one of the smart things there is design the right habitat for all the species of fish that you want. So if you're going to have a half-acre pond, you may design some spawning beds, and let's just make it a 1 acre pond, and you want it to be kind of a natural pond that supports sport fish. Well, you're going to want in that 1 acre pond probably 3 or 4 brush piles that are I'm going to tell you 6 by 6 by 6, and think dense. Think cedar trees combined. Now, cedar trees won't last very long. They'll collapse and they'll break down. And after about 8 years, all you have left is the trunk. So think about density. Hardwood brush is good. Now keep in mind, you're not going to catch a fish in the middle of that brush. You're only going to be able to catch them around the outside. So as you're thinking about these habitat things, you should also be thinking about how you're going to fish it, because that's a big deal. But you also want all the different elements. You want spawning beds. In a 1 acre pond, I'd like to see 3 or 4 spawning beds for bluegill. Don't worry about bass. If you got some water that's flat at 2 feet to even down as far as 4 feet, bass are going to spawn. You only need 1 pair of bass to spawn every year, and you're overcrowded with bass anyway. So bluegill, that's a big deal. Are you going to feed the fish? If you're going to feed them, set up a feeding station that's easy to access. You don't want to put a feeder over in the middle of the woods where you got to work real hard to get to it, and then carry a sack of fish food 100 yards and on your shoulders, and then dump it into a feeder, and you got to be looking for snakes around the base of it. Figure that out before you build it. So that's the first thing. That's the first step. Answer the question why. Set your goals, and based on your goals, then you design. The step to design the dam is engineering and math. You may need help with that. So who do you talk to? Talk to an earth moving contractor, but don't necessarily lean on the dirt mover for your end game answers. Just like this couple that called me today, or I talked to today, their earth mover was building a road, and they said, we'd like a pond. He said, okay, I can do that. But now they're questioning whether it was built right. So was it cored? So how wide is it? What kind of slopes does it have? Is it the right size? What kind of soils do they have? Do they have good clay soils? Did he line it? When he built the dam, did he just push it up and do nothing on the backside slope? I looked at one last week for a guy that I'd talked to 6 or 8 months ago, and he just had a guy that was a friend of his come out and build it. And the guy just pushed up a little bitty pond, probably not even a 20th of an acre for his kids to swim in. But he pushed the dirt up, he pushed it, and then let the dirt fall in the back. And it fell into a bunch of trees, little bitty trees, brush, stuff like that. There's some gaping holes on the backside slope. There's not even a backside slope. One tree covered up was a pecan tree that this family wants to keep. Well, it's buried 3 feet deep in dirt. So I told him, man, that tree is going to be dead within a year. It just doesn't work that way. So they took a guy that knew how to operate a bulldozer, but not how to build a pond. So shopping for the right contractor for your job is a big deal as well. You need to pay attention to that. Hey, it's a little after 7. I'm going to stop and do a commercial. I want to thank Purina Mills for sponsoring this show. Aquamax fish foods are by far my best favorite fish foods. I see Brian Lawrence. I see David Figg, Dan Drollop, Winston Marshall. Hi, Dr. Marshall. Good to see you, buddy. Bet you didn't know I could see you on here, but I can. I'm glad to see you, buddy. $35 a year. Pond Boss Magazine. Well worth it. Well worth it. One of the things I tell people is Friday night, 2 days from now, you're going to go out on a date, take your better half. You're going to spend $40. That's going to be gone the next day. This stays with you for a year. And I promise you there's nuggets in every issue that you can use. So go online and subscribe to Pond Boss Magazine. Otto's book, if you're going to build a pond, tonight's topic, just add water. That's a good one. And then Perfect Pond. And I forgot to get a bottle of water today. Perfect Pond, want one. There's some good resources for you, as well as this Facebook page and www.pondboss.com. Ask the Boss. Great discussion forum. You can get a whole lot of answers. A lot of answers. I promise you can. Looks like Chris Piper's checking in. Joshua McCurry is giving us a thumbs up. Greg McBill, Brian Lawrence got the hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like. Share this to your news feed. your timeline, you're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss mug that knows how to keep hot things hot and cold things cold. So now, let's get back to the topic here. Let me make sure I haven't missed any questions because there's been quite a few scrolling by me here. Dan Drollop says, I have 2 1-acre ponds connected in the middle by a 20-foot channel. Older ponds 12 feet deep and the newer ponds 10 feet deep. Can we move an aerator from the old to the new? Sure you can. Depending on the kind of aeration system you have, sure you can move it. I don't know why you would unless you just want to aerate one pond. You know, here's a little bit about aeration. There's a variety of ways to aerate a pond or a lake. The most common and most effective one is bottom diffused aeration. That's where you have a high volume, low pressure air compressor that kicks on, you kick it on, it sends atmospheric air through a hose, and it hits a little diffuser that's sitting on the bottom of the pond. And that diffuser breaks the bubbles up, and so you get this plume of bubbles coming up through the water. Looks like Alka-Seltzer, and they're basically churning the water vertically, making the water move vertically. So that's the way it works. That's what I see Dan say, a Vertex 4 disc. So I don't know if that air compressor can, if it's only got one outlet or if it's got 2. If it's got 2, you can probably put 1 in each pond, Dan. Or I would just go buy another system and aerate both of them. Another kind of aeration is horizontal movement, circulators. Those things were developed up north primarily by Casco Marine 45 or 50 years ago to use around boat docks to keep them from freezing up in the wintertime so the docks didn't get torn up in the rivers and lakes in the north. Well, now the circulators are pretty handy because they can move water horizontally or even diagonally. So you can have some good horizontal movement that is like a constant breeze blowing across the pond. Then you've got fountains, which they're more for looks than they are aeration because they don't draft from very deep. You know, plus the thing about fountains is if you're in an arid part of the country, your evaporation rate skyrockets when you kick a fountain on, especially during a low humidity and high temperature days. So what happens with diffused aeration is that moves water vertically from the bottom to the top and stirs it up. Because remember, water processes its wastes with contacting the atmosphere or by contacting the atmosphere. So as organic wastes build up and decompose in your water, one of the best ways for those waste byproducts to release is to touch the air. That way they can exchange gases. So the aerator truly doesn't aerate the water. It moves the water to the atmosphere so it can absorb oxygen, get rid of some carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide gases, other phosphorus type. There's some different kinds of chemical things going on in the water, and when it contacts the air, it's able to release those byproducts and help keep the water healthy and happy and pretty stable. So aeration is a good idea. So let's see here. We got Dan Drop's got one. You know, I think I'd get one more, Dan. But to answer your question, yes, you can move it if you want. Jacob West checking in. I haven't seen Jacob in a while. Well, John Funk, I've already answered your question. So, dude, you're going to have to go back and watch the show from the beginning when we're finished. Mike DeMint, got it. Hashtag Palm Boss Magazine. Okay, so now you've done your due diligence. You've done your homework up to the point that you shop for a contractor. Now, even with a small pond, you need to talk to somebody that's done it. Go look at some ponds. Say, hey, what have you built? And if they're worth their salt, they're going to say, I built a bunch. And you say, well, let's go look at some of them. Then you go look, and then you can visualize what it is that you're going to have. And you might look at one and say, I don't particularly like the way that looks. I don't like the shape of the dam. I don't like the configuration of the dam. I don't like the slopes. You know, and so I think it's a wise idea to go with your earth mover and look at some other ponds. If he says, I don't have very many, I've not done that many, then don't use him. Find somebody that's done it before. There's too many risks involved. I can't tell you how many times I get a call from somebody. Got a call from a guy a couple of years ago, just popped into my mind, from Western North Carolina. He hired a guy, spent $35,000 to build a pond, and when they got finished, it rained, it filled up. 4 days later, it was empty. and the guy won't come back and do anything about it. And the guy had spent his budget. So now he's faced with mowing an empty hole of subsoils that won't grow grass or fix it. Well, you figure all that out before you ever move any dirt. So you work with somebody that's good. You make sure you got good clay soils. You make sure you got the right size watershed and that you're building the right size pond for that watershed. If you do those things like Dr. Marshall did with his lake, you're going to be catching double-digit bass like Dr. Marshall's catching right now. And so there's a whole lot to think about, even with the small pond. Of course, there's a lot less to think about with a small pond than with a bigger one, but nonetheless, you still need to do that. Let's see here. David Schneiderman, our Easy Dock buddy. You need a dock? Talk to David. Also, I wanted to talk about Texas Hunter feeders. Those guys, they're great. I love those guys. They make outstanding feeders. Look up Texas Hunter products online, and you're going to find the best feeder company out there and the best customer service. Yeah, their feeders are expensive, but you know what? You get what you pay for with that. And their customer service is spot on. All right, so now you've shopped and you found a contractor. Now, how do you know what contractor to use? First of all, they better have been able to have done it before, and they need to show you. Let's go look at some ponds. They need to be listening to what you want rather than forcing you to listen to what they want, because you've done the thinking. You know what you want, and you've expressed it to them. That means you got to be able to work with them. The third tip is don't just assign them the duty and then walk away from it. I'll never forget in the mid-90s, I had a guy call me, and it was during the time that the oil field had collapsed, real estate market plummeted, and the stock market the stock market plummeted, real estate and oil. And in Texas, that's the economy. Well, when that was like in the 87, 88, through there somewhere. Well, after that, we started seeing technology money's changed hands. It didn't just disappear. It went away from there and started showing up over here. So now we had a bunch of younger guys that were starting to get rich. Well, this guy found a contractor, said, man, I want a pond. I want you to make it as deep as it needs to be, and let's go. So the guy called me about 3 months into the project of a 2-acre pond. Listen to me, 3 months for a 2-acre pond. And I went and looked, and I saw this pond. We drove up. The young landowner, I remember he was chomping on a cigar. I don't know why I'm saying that, but I just remember that. So I met him. We drove in the gate. I followed him in his BMW. This was out east of Dallas. And I saw this mountain of dirt that I thought had to be the highest point in Hunt County at that time. And we got out and looked, and what we saw looked like a dadgum ice cream cone. Straight down, 2-acre pond, 40 feet deep. Why in the world? Can you imagine how much that earth moving bill was? That guy just didn't know, and the earth mover either didn't know or took advantage of him, and both of those are bad. But it was still incumbent on that landowner to know that. You don't just throw your trust out there. I love what Reagan said, trust but verify. You need to do that when you're going to build a small pond or even a big pond. So pay attention to that. So you find the contractor you can work with, but you also got to hold them accountable. Get them to bid the job. Now, here's the problem with that. When they bid the job, every single time they're going to overshoot it because they don't know really what's going on underground until they start moving dirt. So when you have them bid the job, then you can turn around and work with them and say, hey, you know what? Let's fix it where it doesn't exceed this much, but if we can get it done for less, let's do that as long as it accomplishes your goals. You don't want to cut corners, I promise you. You don't want the cheapest guy. You probably don't want the most expensive guy. The most expensive guy is trying to scare you off because he's too busy, and the guy that's the cheapest is shooting you low just so he can get to work. And he probably doesn't know what he's doing. And if he does, you're going to get upcharged because he's going to come to you, take his hat off one day, wipe the sweat off his brow and say, man, there's some things out here we didn't know were going to happen, so it's going to cost more. And then pretty soon, your prices run up. So that's some pretty good tips there. Be involved. That's what I'm telling you. Go check the dirt work. Unless you've got a good ranch manager, you know that guy's going to do it. You know what? I'm not even going to qualify it. Go follow up on the dirt work. So let's see here. Let's answer a couple of questions here. Mike Waltrip, how often and will copper-nosed bluegill reproduce if not ideal breeding grounds like a bowl-type pond? Not very often. And now, of course, copper-nosed bluegill, they thrive in the southeast and the south and part of the southwest. So I'm going to tell you, copper-nosed bluegill do the best. If you draw a line across the nation that starts from on the east coast, close to the North Carolina, Virginia border, and you sweep it a little bit south, you go just south of, or right through Nashville, Tennessee, just south of, through Little Rock, just south of Oklahoma City, and then run all the way to California. South of that line, copper-nosed bluegill are going to do pretty well. But depending on where you are, like in the southeast, copper-nosed bluegill will spawn 5 times a year. Here where I live in North Texas, they'll spawn 4 times a year. Now, here's what they need. So when you're designing this small pond, design some areas and take evaporation into consideration. So you may want to develop some spawning beds that are flat enough, 3-to-1 slope down to about 2 feet, then build them a little ledge. The ledge needs to be as big as the hood of a pickup. That's how big it needs to be for a small pond. If you've got 3 of those in a 1-acre pond, that's enough. And then 3-to-1 slope on down all the way to the bottom. So you need some breeding grounds. Now I tell you what we did, the pond I told you about a while ago, where there was the highest mound of dirt and it looked like an ice cream cone. I told the guy, he didn't like it and I didn't care, but what I told him was, get the bulldozer guy back in there and push a bunch of dirt back down in the bottom. Make the thing not 40 feet deep, get it less than 30, make him make the bottom flat, and then have him take the bulldozer, because it was like not a 1-to-1 slope, but pretty dadgum close to it going down. That's unsafe. If a deer falls in it, ain't going to get out. If a kid falls in it, it's going to be a struggle. So I told him to push some dirt off the top, push it down in the bottom, and then figure out where the water line was going to be based on where the water was going to flow in, and then go build a ridge all the way around that pond at 5 feet deep. I also told him, because I knew that he'd get some evaporation going on in that pond. Then I told him at the beginning of where the ridge was going to be, have it sloped at about a 6-degree slope, starting at 6 inches, going down to 5 feet deep, 5 feet deep all the way around, then coming out, have that same slope coming up at a 6-degree slope to where it's like 6 to 10 inches deep. So that was where I had him put some gravel for spawning beds. And that worked out pretty good. So there's Sean Parker checking in from South Florida. Jeff Miller, any favorite method for a pond outlet? Rock culvert, ability to easy control the pond level. Yes, there are. A small pond, I've got, on my 12 acres, I have 8 small ponds. And of those, I've got, 1, 2, 3 of them I can drain dry. 1 I won't. The other 2 I will. So I've got pipes in the bottom of those ponds, and those 3 ponds have 3-inch pipe with a 3-inch valve. I can open the valve. Now they've all got overflow pipes. Well, I say that, 2 of them don't. But they've each got an overflow pipe that allows me to regulate the level of the water, where I want the water level to be. So if I wanted to fix it to where the water level could be 3 inches lower, I cut 3 inches off the pipe. If I want to raise it 6 inches, then I add a 6-inch coupling and 6 inches of pipe. And then you always have to have an emergency spillway, because when you do get those big rains, which you're going to have at some point, even in the Sahara Desert, they'll get a big rain from every once in a while, every blue moon, whatever that is. You need to be able to allow the water to have an orderly exit. Now here's your criteria. You don't want water flowing out of your pond deeper than about 4 to 6 inches deep. Think about that. That's going to tell you the width your spillway needs to be. I've seen enough small ponds that were built in watersheds too big to where the spillway is almost as wide as the dam is long, just so the water can't flow out any deeper than about 6 inches, and then vegetate it. I think the very best way is to get a real dense layer of grass. I think that's the best way. Now, what's going to determine the success of a turf spillway compared to others is the pitch. If the angle is too steep, and you can't have a 50-foot wide spillway going all the way from the top to the bottom in most cases, because the terrain won't allow it. Okay, in that case, you do want to reinforce with riprap or something like that, concrete, I've seen guys do different things. And now the ways you can control the pond level is the way the water overflows the pipe or with a valve. Now, of course, with the valve, and you open the valve, you better babysit it or it's going to drain on you because you're sitting there playing dominoes all night long, drinking whiskey, and you forgot. I've actually lost a pond that way, not because I was drinking whiskey and playing dominoes, it's because I forgot. All right, so Mike Cottrell says, yes, do the research on the dirt guide. Don't go cheap or you will pay twice and cry like I did. There you go. There's a living example. Don't take the cheapest guy. And I'm just telling you that. Talking to I think I told this story last week or the week before about a fellow I was talking to in Missouri that built a really nice sized lake. And because he didn't hire the right people, it cost him over $100,000 to fix his mistake. Now that was a big lake and a big dam. So that was kind of an issue there for him. I don't know what happened to Mike. I kind of do remember what happened to Mike, but he can tell that story if he wants. But if you do your homework and you pick the right person, then instead of telling me stories about, oh man, I picked the wrong people and it cost $100,000 extra, you're going to say, well, man, I'm really pleased. We did our homework. The lake is perfect. My wife loves it. The kids are having a ball, and we wouldn't have done it any different. I would much, much, much rather hear that. So now let's see what Ron's got to say. Can you add feed-trained bass to an existing population? Yes, you can. We do that all the time. It's not unusual for a lake that we're managing that ends up with overcrowded largemouth bass, and the landowner just doesn't want to take the time to harvest a bunch of bass. What we'll do is we'll come in and add some feed-trained bass. And here's what happens when you add feed-trained bass to an existing bass fishery. You're going to feed those bass. All right, and they're going to grow like crazy, and you're going to have this population over here living parallel to this fish population over here. But this fish population over here is going to benefit from the feed that you're feeding these feed-trained bass because you're going to be able to grow more bluegills because the bass aren't going to eat all the food. There's going to be other fish to eat some of that fish food. So the answer is yes. You can have two parallel populations in there. These may not gain a lot of weight, and these will. Now, your caveat is you can only have so much biomass per unit of water. So you don't want to go in there and put 500 feed-trained bass in a half-acre pond, but you can sure put 50 to 100 in there and feed them, and then you can start doing the regular culling things based on those that aren't performing as well if you want to grow a few big bass. So yes, you can. I use Aquamax 600 to feed my bluegill so the bass will have high-protein forage. Yes, that's a good choice. Now, the Aquamax 600 pellets are a little bit bigger, so not everybody has bluegill big enough that they can eat the Aquamax 600. In that case, feed MVP, 9 different pellet sizes. Some of them slowly sink through the water column. So what happens when you feed fish, especially bluegills, you're going to see the most aggressive fish hit the water at the top. But underneath, 3 feet deep, 4 feet deep, there's going to be some fish that want to go to the top, but they're timid. So if some feed makes its way down to them, they get to eat too. That MVP is good. So choose the right fish food. So now let's see, it says, do the feed trained bass on the 1-inch pellets have better growth rates than the untrained bass that feed on high protein fed brim? Okay, well the pellets are actually, I think, 1/2 or 5/8 of an inch. Nonetheless, the question is, do the feed trained bass have better growth rates? Yes, they do. They have better growth rates. But that doesn't mean that those untrained bass that are feeding on high protein fed brim aren't going to grow. They're going to grow just fine. Just not going to grow at the same rates. Because what's going on there is when you're feeding feed trained bass, you're making sure they get the nutrition that they need every day. When you're trying to manage a fishery of naturally fed largemouth bass like you're talking about, they can only make a living based on what they catch. And then also remember that they're going to convert that pelleted fish food at about 1.2 or 1.3 to 1. And they're not going to expend a lot of energy because they can eat 7 or 8 big pellets and their stomach's full. Where when they're out chasing brim, they're expending energy, and then they convert those brim at 10 to 1. Now, what's the difference? Those brim are about 80% water. So by the time you couple the energy it takes to catch a fish to eat it and the time it takes to digest it, you're going to get better growth rates from the fish food because it's a predictable supply, where the bluegill are not necessarily predictable. So let's see, Mike Waltrip, with so much rain in North Texas, a lot of water coming in and out, good or potential problems? Well, it depends on the speed it comes in and goes out. Because water really likes to stabilize. So in a pond where the water sits for a few days, it's pretty stable. Now it's going to the stability is going to shift based on how fertile that water is. You get a heavy-duty plankton bloom where you got, I was talking about Kenny Backus's lake earlier today, where he's got a real dense plankton bloom of 18 inches or so. You're going to see spikes in oxygen. In the morning it's going to be lower, in the afternoon it's going to be higher. You're also going to see pH spikes, unless that lake is buffered well with plenty of lime, plenty of calcium carbonate. The more you can bring those spikes together, the more stable that water is going to be. But when that water sits, absorbs nutrients, absorbs minerals, it becomes stable and fairly predictable. Then when it rains, it changes all that. I'll never forget watching a pond. This was probably 1989, 90, a long, long time ago. I went and stocked a small pond near the town of Post, Texas. And there was this giant thunderstorm starting to develop just west of there. So we took cover in a barn, and I mean, there were hailstones bouncing off the ground bigger than golf balls. Well, it hadn't rained there in months. But they got a big rainfall, happened in about 45 minutes. It blew on east, and that day, I can't remember the date, but it was in April of 1989. There were strings of tornadoes. This line of storms formed all the way from Mexico up through Texas, all the way to Lake Michigan, moving east. It was a big storm. Well, after the storm passed, we drove down to a 3-acre pond that he'd had forever and ever. That when we were headed to the barn, I looked at that pond, and it was only about 3 feet from the surface. Now it was full and overflowing, and there was ice floating in it. We sat there and watched fish die. And the water was fresh. But what had happened was, over a long period of time, the mineral content grew because the water evaporated. Then the water was diluted, and the temperature probably dropped 25 degrees, killed every fish in it. Let's see here, but Michael, to answer your question, water coming in and out, for the most part, is good. The potential problems are based on the volume of water. If it's giant volumes of water, that can be a problem, because it can completely change the whole dynamics of that pond in that moment. Brian Duke, tell Sean to take me fishing. We can even take Kelly. Dude, Sean? Oh, I'm sure he's working. He ain't watching me. Let's see, Roxy Blasdell, on our 7-acre lake, we have 2 6-inch PVC bottom-sucking siphons that can self-prime or be manually primed for drawdowns. That's an outstanding comment. That's a good thing to look at. Now, 727, I'm going to wrap it up and tell you this. When you have a small pond and you've designed it properly, you've built it properly, and it's meeting your goals and you're enjoying it, you can get 3 or 4 years down the road and say, you know what, I want to change it. You can change a half-acre pond in one day. You really can. Small ponds, mini ponds I call them, are outstanding. If I wanted to take our swimming pond and change it in one day, I could do that. I could go in and not spend a whole lot of money, harvest a bunch of fish. I happen to have a water well. It takes about a month and a half to fill it up with my well, but I can do that. So small ponds can be big assets because they're not expensive to build. How much does one cost? I'm going to tell you it can cost anywhere from $4,000 to $20,000 to build a half-acre pond, depending on the site. Look at there. There's Linda Leisner from Cannon Feeders. Cannon Feeder is the only feeder I know about that can actually throw the Aquamax largemouth pellets. Look them up online. They've got good products as well. So check them out. They're really making a good showing on the fish food side of things, and their intellectual property design is pretty unique. So check them out. Linda, type your website in there. Put a link down here on this show so people can click on it and take a look at you. So I appreciate you guys coming in. And let's see. Here's Brian Lawrence. I'm going to see if I can handle this one. Then I'm going to go home. When culling bass, what do you do with bass over normal cull length but under relative weight? Leave or take out? You got to make a call. If that bass is under 90%, I'm going to tell you I'd take it out. And of course, I've got a bunch of stories about that. That fish may be 26 inches and weigh half what it should weigh because it's old. You know, and if that's the case, then you got to make a decision. It grew up in there, let it die there, or pitch it out. You make the call. Is there a relative weight to take out regardless of length? I'm going to tell you anything under 90% for the majority of the year. If it's 85, 80. If it's 60, out. If it's 85, out. If it's above 85 and it's post-spawn, leave it in. You make that call. I have some 16 to 70% 85 largemouth bass in a basket. If you've got some that are 85%, take them out. Go ahead and do that. All right, there's cannonfeeder.com. All right, 7:30. Hey, $35. Pond Boss Magazine, full of great information, some ads, all kinds of good stuff. We're a good resource for you, and we appreciate you watching. So until next Wednesday, I don't know what the topic's going to be. Somebody shoot me some ideas, because I've covered most of them I know, except there's a bunch I haven't covered I don't know. So thanks for checking in. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you next Wednesday live. Adios.